Joining us now is Peter Baker, New York Times chief White House correspondent and co-author of the new book out tomorrow with his wife and New Yorker journalist Susan Glasser. It is called The Divider, Trump in the White House, 2017 to 2021. Peter, congratulations on this book. It is urgent in these times when Trump is no longer just in the rear view, but potentially on the horizon. And thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it.
So the book is called The Divider for a very specific reason. And you guys go in the introduction, you sort of set the stage as to why you're calling this book The Divider and sort of contrast the Trump administration to previous administrations. You make note of the fact that George H.W. Bush called for a kinder, gentler America. Bill Clinton vowed to be the repairer of the breach. George W. Bush presented himself as a uniter and not a divider. Barack Obama famously declares there's not a blue America and a red America, but the United States of America. Now, obviously, much of this never came to fruition, despite the lofty ambitions of all these administrations. But Trump very specifically came into office preaching about American carnage and living his administration's life, if you will, on the dividing line that split America down the middle. Talk to me a little bit about what you learned in the course of writing this book about how deep-seated that desire to divide truly was within this man who was our president.
Yeah, I think, Alex, you put your finger on it. You really do. Obviously, other presidents didn't live up to the ambitions, as you rightly said, but at least they voiced them. They believed that there was a role for a president in leading the country as a whole. They didn't always, live up to their greatest aspirations, but they understood that that was something that in the American nature, that the leader of the country is supposed to represent all of us. For President Trump, it was always a strategy to divide. It wasn't just, at a campaign event where you need to attack the opponent. Dividing was part and parcel of his presidency from the beginning, dividing the country, dividing his own staff, dividing his party, dividing Washington, dividing even at times his own family. And it's the nature of who he is. Now, he wasn't the one who caused the polarization in America that we see today. He, in some ways, is a symptom of it, but he also, of course, took advantage of it. He recognized, in a way, what was already happening in our society, how much we were fragmenting, how much we were pulling up ourselves apart into different tribes. And that, in fact, became the launching pad for him to get to the presidency in the first place.
The reason we focus a lot in that intro on immigration is because it's sort of the perfect capsule for Trump's desire to divide, right? This literal border wall, this notion of us versus them, who belongs here, who didn't. And you note in the book that Trump believes he won the 2016 election because of immigration. I found that really interesting. I think that there are a lot of issues that he stoked fear around, but none as forcefully and as effectively as immigration. Can you talk more about his remorse that he had to reverse some of the policies like family separations at the border and his reluctance to actually embrace that reversal? He wanted to go back to the period where agents were tearing children away from their parents.
He believed that there was almost nothing that could be done that was too tough when it comes to stopping people coming over the border and targeting immigrants in this country, particularly illegal immigrants, but also legal immigrants at times. Some of the legislation he endorsed would have cut legal immigration to this country as well. So it's not just about whether people have broken the law coming in or not. There was a visceral feeling inside the party when he started talking about building the wall at these rallies. He loved the response he was getting. It encouraged him to go further. He understood that he was crystallizing a policy down to just these three words, build the wall, build the wall. And it was a powerful message to him that to galvanize supporters, to get people to come to these rallies, to get them to vote for him, he needed to be as tough as he possibly could. And that meant unleashing people like Stephen Miller, hardliners on immigration who would be, relentless in looking for every possible policy way to attack immigration, reducing the refugee cap, getting rid of asylum claims to the extent that you possibly could. Time and time again, President Trump would tell Kirstjen Nielsen, for instance, just shut the border, just shut it down, even though, of course, there is no legal authority to do that. And when Nielsen would tell him that, he would just pound on her, really bullying her to the point where she finally told colleagues that if she wrote a memoir, she would call it "Honey, Just Do It," because that was Trump's attitude. He didn't care if people thought it was illegal. He didn't care if people told him he didn't have the power. He wanted it done, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing until he found people who would do what he wanted to do.
Well, and I found it staggering you quote Stephen Miller at the moment he sort of consolidates power vis-a-vis immigration, saying, "This is my coronation." The sense of entitlement and impunity is breathtaking, Peter. Can you talk a little bit more about the role that Stephen Miller played in being the architect of this and the sort of monarch, if you will, when it came to this draconian practice of family separations?
Well, Stephen Miller cared about this issue more than anybody else. And as a result, he became sort of the one person within the White House who made sure it was on the agenda every possible way it could be. He convened meetings of people from across the administration, sometimes without even cabinet secretaries knowing about it. You know, Kirstjen Nielsen and John Kelly, they would discover only afterwards that Miller was pushing some policy with officials who didn't even tell them what was going on. He was a very smart, savvy, bureaucratic player. He figured out how to enact policy that would accomplish the goals he wanted to, sometimes even if the president himself wasn't fully on board. And he was relentless in pushing back against people he thought were weak, like Kirstjen Nielsen, like John Kelly, like anybody else who told him, wait a second, let's follow the law here. There's rules. There's also tradition. He didn't like when people told him he can't do it. So this idea of being his coronation, when finally he felt like President Trump had given him the power, the authority, the mandate to finally enact some of these policies he wanted to, particularly family separation. It was a victory for him. And he was the one person, if you look back on these 4 years, the one aide who stays on President Trump's good side basically the entire time, never finds himself on the outs, because he figured out how to manage the president, how to accomplish the things he wanted to accomplish as best they could within the power they had, and to stay on his good side.